I'm Elizabeth Carter, 33 years old, the daughter they branded a failure, the sister they praised only in comparison to me. In the Carter house, Rebecca was the polished star while I was reduced to whispers about wasted potential. But the night she called me our family's biggest disappointment, I realized silence was never surrender, it was strategy. Ever been erased from your own family's story? Hit like if you've ever had your worth mocked. Comment if you've carried success in silence. It all began that Christmas dinner when my mother's summons felt less like an invitation and more like a command. Inside warmth hit me like an accusation. Pine and beeswax polished floors reflecting light from the tree that reached the ceiling. The house always looked like a magazine spread Victorian bones wrapped in velvet drapes, polished oak, and smugness. My mother appeared first, moving with that quick authority that turned greetings into inspections. Margaret Carter kissed the air near my cheek, perfumed sharp pearls catching the light. "You're late, Elizabeth," she said softly. Her tone was always soft when it cut deepest. "Rebecca's already started telling the story about the firm's gala." Of course she had. I peeled off my coat, handed it to the waiting doorman, and smoothed my hair. In the mirrored hall, my reflection didn't look like the disappointment they thought. It looked like someone learning to enjoy patience. The drawing room swelled with laughter. Rebecca stood in the center, every angle curated. She was my opposite in every way: polished hair, a diamond bracelet catching the firelight, champagne flute poised like a microphone. She saw me and smiled as though Christmas had delivered its entertainment. "Liz," she said, stretching the single syllable until it dripped condescension. At last. I gave her a nod and a neutral smile. Neutrality was my shield. Cousins shifted their eyes, scanning me like spreadsheets seeking deficit lines. Daniel raised his glass in a parody of a toast, smirk curling. My father offered a brief pat on my shoulder, an affectionate afterthought, before drifting back toward men dissecting market yields. "How's the shop?" Rebecca tilted her head, pretending curiosity, savoring the pause before her knife. "Still selling those cute little outfits online? A hobby business, wasn't it?" The room chuckled on cue. I let the laughter wash past, let silence stretch into discomfort. "Business is steady," I said finally, voice calm. "Adorable," she replied, sipping. I might have told her that steady was a lie, that steady meant warehouses full, numbers climbing, buyers waiting. But secrets kept are weapons earned. Dinner called. We migrated to the dining room, a cathedral of oak and silver. Place cards guided us into position. I sat between Patricia and an empty chair for Andrew, Rebecca's soon-to-arrive fiancé. Across the candles, Rebecca glittered with ease, her stories sharpened to entertain. Toasts rose, each more self-congratulatory than the last. Promotions, investments, acquisitions. My family worshipped accomplishment with the zeal others reserved for prayer. When it was my turn, I lifted my water. "To health," I said, "and to keeping what we have." Polite claps, thin smiles. Patricia leaned in, voice syrupy. "I saw a documentary about small businesses. Inspiring, really. Must feel fulfilling. Very fulfilling." Daniel snorted. "But hey, passion doesn't pay for private school." The table laughed. I placed my spoon down with care, refusing to rise to it. They thought silence was surrender. They never guessed it was calculation. My father dabbed his mouth. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice lowering into the tone that commanded rooms. "How long do you plan to experiment? You're 33. "I'm working," I replied evenly. Rebecca's smile widened. "On what? Reinventing Etsy." The laughter swelled again. Heat pricked the back of my neck, but I locked my face into serenity. Inside anger coiled, 8 years of dismissal condensed into iron. Then Rebecca leaned back, her voice pitched just loud enough to pierce. "You've always been our biggest disappointment, Liz." Her words hit the table like glass shattering, though no one gasped. They didn't need to. Everyone had thought it. She merely signed it aloud. My mother murmured something about kindness, but even that was choreography. I raised my glass, sipped water, and smiled with my teeth. It unsettled her just a fraction. The fire flickered against the windows, snow beyond them reflecting fragments of light. Inside my chest, the bell of certainty tolled. They thought they knew the ending of my story. They thought wrong. My phone resting beside my plate buzzed once. The screen lit confidential Vogue cover. I tapped it silent, sliding it face down before anyone noticed. And I smiled again because secrets are sweetest when you know exactly when to open them. Every insult they threw became another brick in the empire I was quietly building. My old bedroom still smelled faintly of laundry starch and teenage hope. Someone, probably the housekeeper, had kept it staged like a shrine, trophies, dusted bulletin board, aligned the same pale curtains my mother approved of when color felt like a risk. The carpet carried the quiet of years I'd lost arguing with ghosts. In the corner, covered by a thin veil of muslin, waited the thing that had never judged me, the sewing machine. Its silhouette was as familiar as my own hands. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, letting the muffled party fall away. A laugh from the hall dissolved into silence. I crossed to the window and traced a finger through the fog on the glass. Down below, the driveway glittered with tire tracks and footprints, comets and constellations pressed into snow. This house taught me a language of appearances. It took leaving to learn a truer tongue. Law school had been my parents' dream for me, respectable, billable, measurable. I lasted one semester. I remember the fluorescent library light pooling over casebooks that read like fences, and how my brain kept sketching hems in the margins instead of precedent. I kept telling myself I was tired, that I'd adjust. Then one night I walked past a student fashion show in a campus auditorium, just a small thing, a dozen brave kids pinning chances to fabric, and something in my chest stood up and answered to its name. The next morning, I returned the contract's volume and bought a used dress form from a graduating senior who cried when I told her I'd actually use it. My parents called it a phase. My sister called it adorable. That Christmas, when I announced I was leaving the program, my father looked at me as if I'd dented the family car. My mother folded her hands and said, "We support your passions the way some people say, we forgive your crimes." Rebecca did not bother with diplomacy. "One day you'll get tired of playing pretend," she said, then leaned in to kiss my cheek. Memory unspooled, seamless as silk. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress firmer than I remembered, and followed the thread to the night that turned a hairline crack into a fault. A charity gala sophomore year. The venue, a converted mill strung with Edison bulbs, brick walls hung with student art. I'd been invited to show 3 sketches on an easel near the silent auction, no garments yet, just concepts. Between the cheese cubes and earnest speeches, I watched strangers pause, tilt their heads, smile at the shapes my pencil had imagined. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Rebecca arrived late, a blaze of lip gloss and certainty, trailed by friends whose shoes cost more than my textbooks. She oohed and awed, air-kissed me, and drifted on. I left my easel for 10 minutes to help reset a toppled display. When I came back, one page was gone, a jacket cut on a bias that coaxed elegance from recycled fiber seams crossing like clean scars, closure disguised as jewelry. I scanned the room. Rebecca stood near the stage, one hand on the missing page, presenting it to a hedge fund heir as if it were an amusing postcard she'd just discovered. "My little sister doodles," she said. "Cute, right? I told her I'd show you." She wanted feedback. She hadn't asked. She never did. But the harm wasn't the sharing, it was the rewiring of authorship. As she spoke, she tilted the paper so her wristwatch flashed, and the heir's eyes tracked the diamonds more than the lines. When his gaze returned, it settled on her. Not me, not the design, but the person holding it. I crossed the floor on legs that remembered every time she'd borrowed without returning. "Rebecca," I said, "calm, that's a draft." She smiled with public teeth. "Relax, Liz. I'm helping." The air asked questions, and she answered them in my language with her accent. I stood there listening to my sentences conjugated in her tense and learned a lesson expensive, as tuition in some rooms, credit accrues to the loudest throat, not the cleverest hands. Afterward, I walked home in a wind that turned my fingers to stone. I sketched until dawn the jacket again and again, until the paper thinned, and then I stitched a muslin mock-up with seams, so exacting they might have been apologies. If I couldn't be the one holding the page, I'd become the person they couldn't ignore, once the page became a garment. Downstairs tonight, their laughter lifted and fell like a careless tide. In here, time behaved. I slid the muslin cover from the sewing machine and brushed dust from its metal throat. The first time I used it, the needle snapped from my impatience and I cried because it felt like proof I didn't belong. The third time, the stitches lined up like soldiers and I cried again because it felt like permission. I saw myself at 21 hands, sore eyes, sandpapered with fatigue, hunched over this very machine while the house slept. Thread bit grooves into my fingers. I learned to ease along curves to listen for the pitch change that meant the bobbin was low, to coax straightness from restless cloth. I ironed seams open and told myself I was flattening doubt. When the lights blew at 2 a.m., I worked by desk lamp cut scraps into test squares and found beauty hiding in discipline. I can still hear my parents' voices through those nights. Not the words those I keep locked outside, but the tones. Skepticism wears a thicker coat than encouragement. My mother's sigh drifting up the stairs. My father's late-night phone voice, the cadence of deals closing without me. Between their sentences, the soft percussion of my machine hummed stubborn as a heartbeat. It wasn't only pride that kept me quiet, it was strategy. I realized early that arguing with people committed to a narrative only lends it oxygen. Better to bank mine for a slow, bright fire. So I built alone patterns taped to walls fabric sourced from mills that wanted to try cleaner methods, small runs tested with customers who cared about more than labels. I posted nothing I wasn't willing to have mocked. I said no to interviews. I said yes to iteration. The work became a room with a door no one else could open and a window that faced risks I chose for myself. The floorboards in the hall creaked. Someone paused outside my door and moved on. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Then I crossed to the machine and set my palm on the cool metal. "You were the start of everything," I whispered. Silence rested warm, honest. A single carol found its way through the vent softened by distance. Snow ticked at the window like a persistent thought. On the nightstand, my phone lit my name across the ceiling. I reached for it out of reflex, not need. The screen brightened with a different subject line bolder than the last. A flare in the dark that made the past sit up and take notice. Her phone lights up again this time with an email subject line from Forbes Fashion's secret billionaire. In my family, dinner was never about togetherness. It was always a trial, and I was the defendant. The dining room gleamed as if it were a stage set for judgment. Chandeliers poured light onto the polished oak table where crystal goblets and porcelain plates reflected back a distorted image of perfection. A choir sang faintly from hidden speakers, but the carols carried no warmth. The air was perfumed with rosemary and wine, but beneath it all lingered the metallic tang of expectation. I took my seat near the end, as always the position reserved for the tolerated rather than the celebrated. Rebecca swept in like she owned the room, draped in red silk that caught every sparkle of the crystal. Daniel had already loosened his tie, laughing too loudly, his cufflinks flashing. Patricia smoothed her pearls, her lips pinched in habitual judgment. At the head, Richard and Margaret presided like magistrates at a sentencing. Conversation rose quickly, not with affection, but with boasting. Daniel bragged about his new promotion, punctuating his words with waves of his wine glass. Patricia chimed in about her son's acceptance into Yale Law, pointedly glancing my way, as if daring me to measure up. Rebecca described her latest boardroom victory with theatrical pauses, her audience hanging on every line. I let the noise wash over me, taking small sips of wine. They thought silence was weakness. They had no idea silence could also sharpen like a blade. Then Daniel turned, his grin widening as if he'd spotted the evening's entertainment. "So Liz," he said, drawing out my name like it was a misstep in etiquette. "Still, what is it?" "Selling dresses online. That's not a career, it's babysitting with a laptop." Laughter scattered around the table like breaking glass. I held his gaze, not flinching. He expected me to shrink, but shrinking was a costume I had long since outgrown. Patricia leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "It's a shame, really. Rebecca has always been so reliable, dependable. You've always had spirit, Elizabeth. But spirit doesn't pay the bills. Not in this family." Rebecca smirked, swirling her wine. "We can't all be leaders." The heat under my skin rose, but I kept my face neutral. Let them play their parts. I knew my script better than any of them. Margaret dabbed her lips with a napkin, her voice carrying the practiced softness of someone delivering harsh truths as kindness. "We should address the matter of the estate later this evening," she said. "The family deserves clarity." I felt the shift instantly, the tightening of shoulders, the gleam in Rebecca's eyes, Daniel's smirk ripening into something smug. They had rehearsed this. Richard cleared his throat, his fork clinking deliberately against porcelain. "It's time we're all honest," he said, his voice heavy with authority. "Elizabeth will not be considered in the Carter estate until she proves she can take life seriously. A hobby cannot form the foundation of legacy." Every word landed like a gavel strike. The table quieted, but the silence was approval, not outrage. I set my fork down with care, aligning it with the edge of my plate. For a moment, I simply looked at them, my family of prosecutors, blind to the evidence waiting just outside their vision. Then I let the words fall, cool and deliberate, each one a small detonation. Good. I never needed the Carter estate. The room froze. Glasses stilled in midair, mouths, half-open, laughter choked off. The silence that followed was not polite. It was shocked, brittle, a mirror cracking down the middle. They didn't just want to dictate my career, they wanted to own my future. The drawing room glowed with firelight, the flames licking against the marble hearth as though mocking the tension simmering within its walls. Shadows stretched across gilded frames, portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching as if in approval of what was about to unfold. Crystal glasses clinked faintly. The air carried the perfume of cognac and pine, a holiday night cloaked in elegance, but reeking of control. I had just begun to retreat into the sanctuary of silence when footsteps echoed down the hall. Andrew Whitmore appeared, perfectly timed like an actor striding on cue. He was polished, every hair in place, his suit tailored to whisper of money and influence. The smug tilt of his jaw made it clear he knew this was his stage, and I was supposed to be his prize. "Elizabeth," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false warmth. "It's been far too long. You look exactly the same." His eyes flicked over me with the proprietary gleam of a buyer inspecting merchandise. Rebecca smirked from the velvet chair in the corner, arms folded as though enjoying the unfolding play. My parents rose slightly, Margaret gesturing with the kind of pride she reserved for things she could claim ownership of. Richard's expression was fixed, steely with expectation. "Andrew's just been promoted to senior partner at his firm," Margaret announced as though presenting the evening's entertainment. "A young man of such promise deserves a wife who can match his stature." Andrew laughed lightly, taking a slow sip from his glass. Elizabeth always had a flair for creativity, but creativity can be a wonderful complement to stability. "And stability," he added, Letting the word linger is what you need most. I could feel my jaw tighten. They thought this was subtle. It was anything but. Richard leaned forward. Elizabeth, your mother and I have always wanted what's best for you. Andrew is intelligent, accomplished, and most importantly, reliable. A partner who will secure your future. The implication stung. They had never once acknowledged that I might be capable of securing my own. Andrew placed his glass on the mantel, then reached into his pocket. The firelight caught a flash of brilliance, a diamond ring that seemed almost grotesque in its ostentation. Gasps rustled through the room as he turned, lowering himself onto one knee with theatrical precision. Elizabeth Carter, he said, his grin smug, and practiced allow me to give you the future your family knows you deserve. He held up the ring, the stone blazing like a command. For a moment I let the silence stretch their expectant eyes, pressing down on me like chains. Rebecca leaned forward, her lips curling with satisfaction. Margaret clasped her hands as though she had already won. Richard's eyes drilled into mine, daring me to reject the script. I stepped forward, reaching out just enough for the diamond to catch the firelight, letting it burn between us. Then I smiled, not with joy, but with ice. Beautiful ring, I said softly, the words slicing through the tension. My eyes locked with Andrew's, unflinching. But I don't sell myself. The effect was immediate. A collective gasp filled the drawing room, sharp as shattering glass. Margaret's face drained of color. Richard's jaw hardened, the muscle ticking violently. Andrew's confident grin faltered, his hand frozen in the air. And in the corner, Rebecca's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something darker crossing her face. She was already plotting her next move. Every insult was fuel, every humiliation a match. I was ready to light the fire. The garden was cloaked in silver stillness, snow draped over branches like fragile lace. Frost clung to the hedges, glittering beneath the moonlight as though nature itself had frozen mid-breath. My boots crunched softly against the powder as I stepped away from the glowing mansion, the laughter and music muffled by heavy walls. The cold bit into my skin, but it was welcome. It kept me sharp awake, aware. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, its screen casting a pale glow against the winter night. My breath fogged in the air as I scrolled past meaningless notifications until I saw it, the email that had been waiting, the one I had deliberately silenced at the table. The subject line pulsed like a heartbeat. Confidential Vogue cover. My thumb hesitated, hovering for just a second before I opened it. The words blurred slightly as I read, not from tears but from the sheer force of the moment pressing against me. Confirmation. The photo shoot date set January 3rd. They had chosen me not as a favor, not as a token, but because my work had carved its way into the world so deeply it could no longer be ignored. Vogue wasn't a whisper of validation. It was a declaration. I exhaled, the steam curling upward like smoke from a hidden fire. 8 years of silence, tonight it ends. I whispered, my voice trembling with power more than emotion. For so long I had endured their dismissals, their cruelty disguised as concern. I had built everything in the shadows, each insult driving me further, faster. Now the shadows themselves were my allies. I hadn't noticed the faint crunch of footsteps behind me, at first softer than mine, careful. The garden path wound between tall evergreens, their needles heavy with snow. Somewhere in that darkness, someone lingered. I straightened slightly, ears sharpening to the faint rhythm of breath that wasn't my own. Rebecca. I didn't need to see her face to know. She was a predator who thought herself clever, always circling, always waiting for the moment to strike. I could almost imagine her standing there in her fur-lined coat, arms crossed, lips twisted in that familiar sneer. The email glowed on my phone screen. I moved my thumb with deliberate finality, hitting reply. The words came easily, confirmed. I'll be there. A single click, and it was sent into the world, an irreversible spark dropped onto a field of waiting kindling. Behind me, in the hushed dark, I caught the faintest shift of movement. Rebecca hadn't seen the screen clearly. She'd caught only fragments, and fragments were dangerous in her hands. I knew her too well. Her talent wasn't in truth, but in twisting half-formed knowledge into weapons. I let the silence stretch the frost-dusted air, filling with unspoken triumph. The mansion windows glowed faintly in the distance, the party still alive within, but out here it was only me, the cold and the future burning bright in the palm of my hand. A twig cracked softly. My head turned just enough to catch the edge of her silhouette among the trees. She thought she was hidden, thought her little spy game was unnoticed. I didn't call her out. Not yet. Because I knew exactly what she would do. Rebecca's smirk curled in the shadows, her breath white against the black night. Perfect, I heard her murmur, low and venomous. I'll expose her in front of everyone tomorrow. Christmas dinner wasn't about family, it was about survival. The long oak table gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, every polished silver fork and ruby-colored wine glass arranged with military precision. The Carter Estate's dining hall was always less a place of warmth than a theater, its velvet drapes and gilt-framed portraits watching as if they too were judges. I slid into my seat at the far end, my back straight. My smile practiced my armor invisible. The air smelled of roasted duck chestnuts and champagne, but beneath it all lingered tension sharp as steel. I could already feel Rebecca's gaze flicking toward Daniel, the silent, conspiratorial glance they had exchanged earlier in the hallway. I didn't need to hear their words to know the truth tonight. I was their entertainment, their target. One by one, the toasts began. A cousin bragged about his latest promotion at the law firm. Another aunt detailed her son's acceptance into Harvard. Laughter rippled through the room, punctuated by the polite clink of glasses. Every boast was a subtle reminder achievement equaled worth, and in their eyes, I was worth nothing. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his cufflinks glinting in the candlelight. He swirled his wine lazily before smirking in my direction. "Liz," he said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, still playing Etsy Shop. "How's that going, babysitting a laptop between sewing lessons?" The table erupted in chuckles. Some hid behind their glasses, others didn't bother. My mother's lips tightened into what passed for a smile while my father avoided my eyes entirely. I breathed slowly through the rising burn in my chest. Daniel had always been the smirking shadow in my childhood, every failure magnified under his smug grin. Tonight was no different. Patricia, my aunt, with her pearls and endless venom, chimed in before the laughter subsided. "It's such a pity," she said, tilting her head in faux sympathy. "Rebecca's thriving in her career, always so polished. And then there's you, Liz, still dabbling." Her tone lingered on the word as if it were filth. Rebecca's laughter carried across the table, warm and musical, but I could hear the blade beneath it. She rose to her feet, glass in hand, her movements graceful, rehearsed. "Shall we?" she announced. The room quieted, waiting. She paused for effect, her eyes scanning the guests before locking on me. "Here's to Liz," she declared, raising her champagne. "Our family's queen of hobbies." The words echoed against the walls like a gavel. The room broke into roaring laughter, applause, even from those eager to please her. Glasses clinked, voices rose, and for a moment the sound blurred into a single note of mockery that filled every corner of the hall. Heat surged through me, not shame, but something sharper, controlled rage. I felt my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass until it nearly splintered in my hand. My smile remained faint, cold, a shield they didn't deserve to see through. I leaned forward just enough for my words to slice the air, low and steady, audible only to those straining to catch them. "Laugh now. It's your last chance. Sometimes it takes a stranger to see the truth your own family ignores." The fire in the drawing room crackled, throwing shadows across polished mahogany shelves lined with books no one ever touched. The guests had drifted into smaller circles, voices softened into hushed conversations and clinking crystal. I lingered by the mantel, tracing the rim of my glass with a finger, my posture serene despite the storm I had endured at the dining table. Andrew Whitmore stepped into my orbit with the same easy confidence he had worn earlier, though now there was a curious crease between his brows. He studied me for a long moment before speaking, his tone lower than usual. "You don't look like someone losing." I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. His words carried more observation than flattery, and I recognized the faint crack in his role as the family's chosen suitor. I let a small smile curve at the corner of my lips. "Appearances are deceiving, Andrew." My voice carried the calm of someone who had mastered silence as armor, each word chosen like a card yet to be revealed. He tilted his head, searching my face as if for the hint of something beneath the surface. "You're not rattled," he said almost to himself. Most people would have stormed out after that spectacle. I let the firelight glint in my eyes, allowing him just enough mystery to tug at his curiosity. "Why waste energy proving myself to those who have already decided who I am?" I murmured, my gaze sliding toward the window where snow pressed against the glass like a curtain of secrecy. Andrew leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" The weight of his words lingered between us, a challenge and an invitation. My silence was deliberate, a weapon sharper than confession. I sipped my wine and looked away, leaving him with nothing but his own suspicion. Across the room, Rebecca's eyes narrowed from behind her glass. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she watched the exchange, calculating, already weaving new plots from what she thought she saw. For them, inheritance was a weapon, and I was the target. The library doors closed with a heavy click, sealing me into a chamber that smelled of leather and old smoke. The shelves towered overhead, lined with law books my father had never read and histories my mother pretended to understand. Tonight, the room was a courtroom in disguise, and I was summoned to hear my sentence. Richard sat at the head of the long oak table, fingers drumming in slow, deliberate rhythm. Margaret was at his side, pearls glinting at her throat like a string of judgment. Rebecca lounged across from me, her chin-raised eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. Daniel leaned against the bookcase, smirking as though the outcome was already sealed. My father cleared his throat. "It's time we spoke plainly," he said, each word weighted with finality. "The Carter fortune must be preserved for those who uphold the name. Only the worthy deserve the Carter name." The phrase, sharp as glass, echoed from his earlier remark. I held my expression neutral, though inside the memory of every dismissal burned hot. Rebecca struck first. "Liz's ventures," she said with a sneer, "are nothing but distractions. A Carter doesn't dabble in hobbies while the rest of us carry the family's legacy." Daniel gave a theatrical laugh. "Exactly. Selling trinkets online doesn't count as achievement. She doesn't belong in this discussion." I said nothing. Silence was power, and I had learned how to wield it. Their words fell like stones, but I let them pile up quietly, each insult another brick for the fortress I had been building for years. Margaret's voice, cool and perfumed, drifted through the air. "It's not cruelty, Elizabeth. It's practicality. We cannot afford weakness in the bloodline." My hands rested calmly on the polished wood, though my pulse thrummed. Rebecca leaned forward now, her smile widening as if she could taste triumph. "You'll never be equal to us, Liz," she spat. The words were coated in venom, meant to crush, to make me bow. I lifted my gaze, meeting hers across the table. My voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room, with a clarity that silenced even Daniel's smirk. "There are things money can't buy, and you'll never own them." For a moment no one moved. The fire hissed in the grate, casting shadows that danced across their stunned faces. And I let the silence stretch, because sometimes silence was the loudest declaration of all. Under the snow's silence, the truth burned louder than ever. The night was still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel like a confession. Snow fell in gentle spirals, catching the amber glow of the lanterns along the Carter estate's balcony. My breath curled in small white clouds as I stepped outside, the cold biting at my skin. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses carried faintly through the walls, but out here, was mine. Out here, I could finally breathe. I pulled my phone from my pocket thumb, trembling not from the cold, but from anticipation. A new message sat at the top of my inbox, bold and undeniable confirmation: January 3rd. Shoot, Sophia Martinez, Vogue. My heart thudded once, then steadied as I opened it. The words spilled across the screen like a promise finally fulfilled. We are thrilled to move forward with the cover story. $1 billion valuation confirmed. January 3rd shoot is locked. Congratulations, Elizabeth. 8 years. 8 years of swallowing insult after insult, of letting them call me failure dreamer hobbyist. 8 years of working in silence, building brick by brick what they thought was nothing. My lips parted in a whisper that vanished into the snowy air. 8 years of silence ends tonight. The snow muffled everything, but not enough. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the balcony door, I caught a flicker of movement, a faint rustle. Rebecca. She thought she was clever, trailing me like a cat, catching crumbs of a feast she couldn't see. I didn't turn my head, didn't let on that I knew. Her heels scuffed lightly against the floorboards as she shifted, listening. I could almost hear her mind twisting, reshaping fragments into the narrative she wanted, that I was desperate, inventing grand fantasies to claw back dignity. She wanted lies, so she would see them even when the truth blazed before her. I typed slowly, deliberately, hitting reply, confirmed. I'll be there. January 3rd. My thumb hovered a moment, then pressed send. The small whoosh felt like the crack of a whip, the sound of a door slamming shut on all their disbelief. Rebecca exhaled behind me, quiet but edged with contempt. She thought she had caught me, thought she had ammunition. In truth, all she had was a spark to ignite her own undoing. Inside, the fire roared and carols played faintly, but on this balcony I had my battlefield snow crunching beneath my boots as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. And then, just before retreating inside, I caught the glow of her screen, lighting the dark. She was already texting. Tomorrow we expose her lies. Be ready. I closed the door behind me, heart steady, as the storm I had summoned moved into place. Tomorrow the theater would open, and they had no idea the script had already been written. The cruelest part of a storm isn't the thunder, it's the silence before it strikes. The grand hall shimmered with false warmth, chandeliers glowing above a sea of sequined gowns and black suits. The air carried the cloying scent of mulled wine and polished silver laughter, pitched just high enough to hide the tension simmering beneath. It was nearly midnight, but no one showed signs of leaving. The Carters never ended their theater before the curtain call. I sat near the edge of the room, phone in hand, thumb grazing the screen like a talisman. Across the floor, Rebecca prowled between groups of guests. Her smile polished her voice, carrying like the sharp edge of glass hidden beneath velvet. Oh, Liz. She's always been the artistic one, she said to a cluster of cousins, the laughter that followed sharp enough to cut. Daniel leaned against a column nearby, swirling his wine. His tone was low, but I caught it all the same. Funny how many frauds there are in the world. Pretending to be something they're not. His eyes flicked toward me as if daring me to react. But I didn't move. I sat still, spine straight, every muscle tempered steel. My father's voice from earlier whispered at the edges of my memory. You will never be taken seriously. He had meant it as a verdict. I carried it now as fuel. Rebecca's shadow swept closer. She let her hand graze Andrew's sleeve in passing, her voice dipped in honey. She tries so hard, doesn't she? Like a child playing dress-up. Andrew stiffened, caught between her words and his own doubts, but he said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Each second thudded like a heartbeat, the quiet rhythm beneath the clamor. I traced the edges of my glass, waiting. The hall was alive with chatter, but beneath it all was an electricity only. I seemed to hear the hum before lightning splits the sky. Rebecca finally broke free from her audience and stepped into the center of the hall, glass raised high, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Everyone," she called out, her voice bright as bells, "I'd like to make a little toast." The chatter softened. Heads turned. Guests leaned in. I felt it, the shift. The stage was hers for the moment, but only because I had allowed it. I didn't rise, didn't speak. I let her bask in the silence she mistook for submission. And then, in that fragile pause, my phone vibrated in my hand. A single name lit the screen, glowing brighter than the chandeliers overhead. Vogue. The ring cut through the music like a blade. Notes faltered. Conversations broke. One by one, heads turned toward me. Glasses lowered. The hall froze. Every eye fixed on the glow in my hand, the name pulsing with the weight of what none of them yet understood. The silence was absolute, sharp, the breath before the storm. Sometimes justice doesn't knock, it calls in the middle of dinner. The grand hall stood frozen, the air so thick with silence it felt like a physical weight pressing down on every guest. My phone rang again, sharp and undeniable, the name glowing across the screen: Vogue. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Crystal glasses hovered mid-air, forks poised over untouched plates. Even the band in the corner let their instruments rest, notes dying unfinished, as every eye locked on me. Rebecca broke the silence with a laugh too shrill to be natural. "Oh, how fitting," she said, her voice slicing through the stillness. "Another return request, I suppose. Or maybe they're canceling your little online shop subscription." The hall chuckled weakly, but the unease was palpable, like an orchestra playing just slightly out of tune. I didn't look at her. My thumb slid across the screen, steady, deliberate. "Hello." My voice carried in the quiet, firm and clear. I pressed speaker, letting the sound fill the room. "Elizabeth Carter." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, yet warm. "This is Sophia Martinez from Vogue. I wanted to personally congratulate you. The January issue has been finalized. You'll be our cover feature." The headline reads, "Fashion's Secret Billionaire." The words detonated in the air like fireworks. For a breathless moment, the room held its silence so absolute that the faint hum of static from the call seemed deafening. Then gasps. Sharp intakes of breath, crystal stems clattering against plates, the unmistakable sound of a glass slipping from someone's hand and shattering against the polished floor. I raised my eyes, slowly meeting the stunned faces that surrounded me. Richard's hand had gone rigid around his glass knuckles, white. Margaret's lips parted in disbelief, her perfect posture faltering. Daniel stared, blinking as though reality itself had glitched. Andrew's brows knit, his mouth opening, then closing again, searching for words. And Rebecca's face blazed crimson. Her mouth trembled, but no sound came. For once, the clever words she so adored had abandoned her. Sophia continued, her voice a lifeline, pulling the moment deeper into the open. "Your valuation numbers are extraordinary, Elizabeth. Forbes is coordinating with us on the dual feature. The world will know very soon." I let the words linger. I didn't need to embellish, didn't need to gloat. The truth spoke louder than anything I could have crafted. Around me, whispers began to spread like a fire leaping across dry grass. Billionaire cover story. She hid all of this. The disbelief twisted into awe, into fear, into something they could no longer laugh away. Rebecca snapped back, her chair screeching against the marble as she leapt to her feet. "No." Her scream cracked through the hall like thunder. "She's lying. This is all a trick. Some elaborate scam." Her voice trembled with fury, desperation, the realization that the ground she had stood on so confidently was crumbling beneath her heels. But no one laughed with her. Not this time. The silence that followed her outburst was darker, heavier, and it belonged to me. A single revelation can unravel years of scorn. The grand hall had transformed into a courtroom, the chandeliers casting judgmental light over every stunned face. Sophia's voice still echoed from my phone, crisp and undeniable, her words carrying the weight of irrefutable proof. And to confirm, she said, tone steady, Forbes has verified the valuation. Elizabeth Carter's company has surpassed $1.2 billion. The syllables landed like hammer strikes against marble. Gasps rippled again, sharper this time, as if the air itself fractured. Forks clinked against porcelain. Someone coughed into the stunned hush. The Carter family's empire, built on inheritance, arrogance, and control, suddenly seemed small, fragile, irrelevant, compared to the empire I had quietly built in silence. Daniel was the first to break. His laugh sputtered awkward as he rose half out of his chair, but his voice cracked. But you work from home. I've seen you, Liz. I've seen you with that laptop. What? How? How is this possible? His disbelief was naked, childlike, clinging to the old story they had told themselves about me. I let my gaze rest on him, calm and deliberate. Yes, Daniel. From home, from airport lounges, from borrowed studio corners, but also from 12 factories spread across 4 countries. From a workforce of thousands whose names you'll never know because you never cared enough to ask. A murmur coursed through the guests, admiration mingling with disbelief. Some leaned in closer, eyes alight with sudden respect. Others shrank back, uncomfortable with the truth unraveling in front of them. Margaret's lips trembled, her hand reaching for Richard's arm, as though bracing herself against a fall. Richard stared straight ahead, stone-faced, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. This was no longer a daughter to dismiss, it was a force he couldn't contain. Rebecca tried to recover her voice, trembling with venom. Factories, valuations, headlines, all smoke and mirrors. You always were good at pretending. I turned to her, slowly meeting her eyes with a steadiness I had honed through years of dismissal. My words cut sharper than any blade. Pretending. The world doesn't remember pretenders, Rebecca. It remembers originals. And you. My voice hardened, echoing against the marble walls. You stole mine. 8 years ago, my sketches, my ideas, paraded in front of your friends as if they were yours. I was silent then. Not because I was weak. Because I was building something you could never steal. Her breath caught. For the first time, her composure cracked visibly. The guests shifted in their seats, their gazes flicking between us like spectators at a trial where the verdict had already been decided. The room pulsed with the weight of the confrontation. Whispers rose like smoke. She stole from Liz. Was it true all along? How could they not see? Rebecca's hand shook as she lifted her glass, but the stem betrayed her, slick with sweat. The crystal slipped, fell, and shattered across the polished floor. The sound rang out, sharp and final, shards scattering like the last fragments of her facade. And in that instant, everyone knew the thief had been exposed, and the balance of power had shifted forever. For years, she wore the crown of perfection. Tonight, it cracked. The grand hall buzzed like a hive, split open, whispers rushing through the air faster than the chandeliers could catch them. Rebecca stood trembling at the center of it all, her face pale beneath the layers of flawless makeup. Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, broke into shrill fragments. It's lies, all of it. She forged the calls, the numbers, the headlines, don't you see? She's been fooling all of you, just like she's always fooled me. Her words rang hollow. The more she protested, the more desperate she sounded, her crown of superiority slipping with every syllable. Guests leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, their expressions turning from amusement to suspicion. The carefully curated image of the flawless Carter daughter was fracturing under their gaze. Andrew moved before I did. He stepped into the center of the hall, his usually polished composure replaced with something steadier, more certain. "Rebecca," he said, his voice. "Even I've read investor reports. Elizabeth's name is there?" Repeatedly. The holdings, the acquisitions, the brand structures, her work is everywhere if you know where to look. The silence that followed was different than before. This time, it wasn't shock. It was the slow shift of an audience choosing sides. Guests murmured, eyes darting between Andrew's calm certainty and Rebecca's unraveling fury. Even Daniel's confidence faltered, his mouth opening only to close again, the words dying in his throat. Rebecca turned on Andrew, eyes wild. "You're lying." Her accusation crumbled as she realized his composure didn't waver. Her greatest weapon, doubt, was turning against her. I stood, my phone in hand, and walked to the projector near the far wall. With one swift movement, the screen lit up, casting cold blue light across the polished hall. "You want proof?" I asked, my voice steady but loud enough to carry to every corner. "Here it is." The Vogue email appeared first, Sophia Martinez's name, glowing in bold, the words, "January cover impossible to deny." Gasps rippled again. Then I swiped, and the Forbes email filled the screen, valuation $1.2 billion, stamped and confirmed. Each line was a nail sealing Rebecca's coffin. The room shifted fully now, bodies leaning toward me, away from her. Guests whispered not of fraud, but of admiration. Phones emerged discreet at first, then bold. Someone had begun live streaming, the glow of red recording lights multiplying in the crowd. The estate's walls could no longer contain the truth. Rebecca's mouth worked soundlessly, her glassy eyes darting from the screen to the crowd, searching for an ally who would not come. Her crown, the illusion she had worn so smugly, was no longer just slipping. It was shattered. I turned my gaze toward Richard, who had remained frozen throughout the storm. His lips parted, his hand gripping the edge of the table as though the wood alone could steady him. And then, in a voice so quiet it seemed to belong to a different man, he whispered, "Elizabeth, is this all true? You don't need to shout to win. A whisper of truth can devastate louder than any scream." The words echoed in my head as I rose steady and unflinching, while Rebecca stood shaking under the weight of eyes that no longer adored her. The chandeliers threw light across her pale face, catching the trembling of her hands as she clutched the edge of the table. The silence in the hall was absolute, a silence that had once been used against me, but tonight belonged to me entirely. Daniel, desperate to salvage something, scoffed from his corner. "So what if you got a cover? So what if your name is in a few reports? Companies rise and fall every day. Yours is just luck, Liz. Nothing more." His voice rang too loud, the crack of panic beneath it betraying his bravado. I met his smirk with calm. "Luck," I repeated softly. Then, without raising my tone, I pulled another projection onto the screen. Charts, figures, green arcs rising against red declines. These are the numbers of waste we've eliminated, millions of pounds of discarded textiles repurposed into garments that sold out worldwide. Factories that run on renewable energy. Supply chains traced and transparent. This isn't luck. This is deliberate. Built. Earned. A ripple of surprise moved through the guests. The first applause came hesitant, then louder. Someone cheered. Another raised their glass. Soon the grand hall filled with clapping hands, and for the first time in my life, I was not the family's embarrassment. I was the room's center of gravity. Rebecca's face collapsed. She tried to speak, but her throat caught. Her practiced poise fractured into something raw, exposed, and ugly. Margaret's pearls trembled at her throat. Richard remained rigid, but I didn't give them my attention. Tonight was not theirs to own. I looked across the hall, every guest caught in the glow of the screen and the quiet strength of my voice. "Erase me from the will if you want," I said, letting each word hang like steel. "I've already written my own." The hall erupted, not with ridicule, not with scorn, but with something closer to awe. The applause grew echoing off the carved ceilings and gilded frames, drowning out every whisper of doubt that had ever haunted me. And then, Rebecca broke. She shoved back from the table, her glass toppling liquid streaking the linen like blood across snow. With a strangled cry, she fled the hall, her heels clattering against marble as whispers followed her into the cold. The crown she had guarded so fiercely was gone, and all that remained in her wake was silence filled with judgment and the sound of my own victory ringing clear. When the music stopped, arrogance was the only thing left ringing in their ears. The hall had finally emptied, though its air still pulsed with what had just unfolded. Guests filed out in uneasy silence, some whispering with pity, others with awe, and a few with open disbelief. The chandeliers still glowed, but the echoes of applause and shattered illusions lingered like smoke. I walked into the lounge where the fire had burned low its embers, throwing faint light on faces too weary to mask their shame. Patricia was the first to break the silence. She smoothed her pearls as though polishing excuses into them. Elizabeth, she began with a fragile smile. Perhaps I was too harsh before. Misunderstandings happen in families. You know how words can sound harsher than we mean. Her tone was syrup over steel, the same patronizing sweetness she had used on me for years. I let her words hover before answering. A misunderstanding is forgetting someone's birthday, Patricia. What you did was deliberate. You laughed when others demeaned me, and you added your voice to the chorus. Don't minimize it now. Her eyes faltered, and for the first time I saw her forced composure falter into something rawer, guilt. Daniel, who had always strutted with the arrogance of his last bonus check, now leaned forward, hands twisting. Liz, he stammered. I didn't realize what you'd built. Maybe you could give me some advice. Just a few pointers. I've got an investment idea, and his desperation stained every syllable. I almost laughed at the irony, but instead I met his eyes. Advice? I said softly. Daniel, you mocked me for years, called me a hobbyist, told me I'd never measure up, and now you want me to guide you? He shrank back, face coloring, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of truth did the work for me. Richard and Margaret sat apart as though the grand armchairs themselves had become cages. Their silence was louder than any words, a silence weighted with the knowledge of what they had enabled. Margaret's fingers gripped the armrest as if she might carve penance into its wood. Richard stared at the fire, his jaw set, but no denial came. For the first time in my life, their voices, the ones that had dictated mine, were muted. The climax rose not in anger, but in clarity. I stood letting the glow of the fire draw the shadows long across the carpet. Don't apologize to me, I said, each word deliberate, low, but sharp enough to cut. Apologize to the part of yourselves that chose blindness, to the version of you that preferred lies over truth, arrogance over respect, cruelty over fairness. That's who you betrayed, not me. The room stilled. Patricia looked down, her lips pressed tight. Daniel fidgeted, unable to meet my gaze. Richard and Margaret remained as statues, their silence a confession. For once, I wasn't the defendant in their tribunal. They were. As I turned toward the door, a voice followed me, soft yet certain. Andrew had lingered at the edge of the lounge, watching everything. He stepped closer, his eyes steady on mine. I've never seen strength like yours, he said quietly. Not in this family, not anywhere. The words landed not like flattery, but like acknowledgement, genuine, unvarnished, and new. For the first time that night, I felt something shift. The empire I had built was mine alone, but maybe I wasn't as alone as I had always believed. Every empire built on lies eventually burns. Christmas morning cracked open colder than the night before, the kind of cold that made breath look like confession. The Carter driveway, usually a corridor of discreet town cars and polite goodbyes, was jammed with vans' lenses, phones held high on trembling mittens. Sirens didn't wail, but the flashing lights might as well have. The paparazzi had arrived in waves, and the waves brought an undertow of rumor strong enough to drag anyone careless out to sea. The front doors swung wide, and the estate exhaled its guests into daylight. They clustered near the steps, whispers condensing in the air as quickly as steam. Vogue cover, Billionaire, 8 years. I stepped out into the white glare snow squeaking under my boots. Behind me, chandeliers dimmed into the daytime. In my mind, a single crystal fell again in slow motion, Rebecca's shattered glass on marble because some symbols don't fade when the music stops. They echo. Ms. Carter Liz. Over here, confirm the January shoot. Is it true? Forbes verified 1.2, questions fired like sleet. I didn't flinch. Silence could be armor in private. In public, poise was the steel. Across the threshold, Rebecca appeared, flanked by our parents, her face powdered into calm that couldn't hold. The moment cameras found her, the calm tore. She blinked hard, a queen discovering her crown had become ashes in a single night. Margaret touched her elbow, Pearl's bright smile brittle, while Richard stood an inch behind, jaw clenched, a general without a battlefield. Daniel arrived next, already performing distance. Unfortunate scenes, he told a reporter, palms open in practiced innocence. We had no idea. He angled his body away from Rebecca, throwing her to the wolves with the grace of a man who saved only himself. His cufflinks flashed another kind of signal flare. Investors, those who always smell a market before others smell smoke, had come dressed as friends of friends. I recognized the posture, eyes calculating, phones pinging. They didn't look at Rebecca. They looked past her to me, to the horizon line, where a different kind of empire glittered. Her name shrank in their mouths. Mine expanded. Elizabeth Andrews' voice cut through the fuss, low and steady as a dock piling in high tide. He'd found a pocket of quiet at the base of the steps and held it open for me with nothing more than presence. He didn't reach for my arm. He made room for my choice. That more than flowers or speeches felt like respect. But respect wasn't today's headline. Collapse was. A reporter called to Rebecca. Do you have a comment on the allegations that you misrepresented your sister's work in college? The words snapped the last filament of her control. She took a single staccato step forward, heels punching the stone like a gavel. You think she's a saint? Her voice ricocheted off the stone facade. She lies. She manipulates. She hides behind numbers and headlines. She stole everything from me. My place. My future. My family. The crowd inhaled. The microphones leaned in as if curiosity had bones. I let the wind cut my face clean. I thought of late-night seams and bobbins and the sound a machine makes when you've coaxed it into alignment. Of spreadsheets conjured on red-eye flights, of factories lit by renewables a continent away, of women whose names the Carter registry would never hold and whose paychecks no longer depended on a man's whim. You can't steal what is earned. You can't own what you never built. Daniel seized the moment to edge farther from her blast radius. Tensions happen. He murmured to a camera the way one might comment on weather. We just want what's best for the family. He didn't look at Rebecca when he said family. He looked at me. Rebecca, Margaret whispered voice, cracking under the weight of optics and guilt. Cameras clicked like flocking birds. A drone hummed somewhere above the trees, catching the geometry of disgrace from angles no ceiling mirror ever imagined. My father's breath smoked beside him in even lengths. He'd learned to keep rhythm when deals fell apart. The difference was, this wasn't a deal. It was a reckoning. Rebecca's eyes, red-rimmed and glossy, found mine. Fury lived there. So did fear. She wanted me to swing wild, to give her the theater where she thrived. I didn't. I stepped down one stair then another, until we were level in the open. No chandelier, no marble, just day and snow, and the unblinking eye of the world. You stole everything from me, she shouted again, voice breaking on everything. No, Rebecca, you stole from yourself. Cameras flash, immortalizing the moment. The Carter name once chained me, now it was breaking under its own weight. Christmas afternoon lay heavy over the estate, the kind of silence that follows not peace, but wreckage. The study smelled of old leather and brandy curtains drawn so tightly they strangled the light. For decades, this room had been a sanctum of Carter power, where decisions carved out reputations and destinies. Today, it felt more like a mausoleum, thick, suffocating, waiting to swallow the last remnants of pride. Richard sat at his desk, shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen. The patriarch who once thundered through boardrooms looked smaller, palms pressed together as if he were begging some unseen judge for leniency. Margaret stood near the fireplace, her pearls dulled in the shadows, wringing her hands. The echo of reporters outside, the faint hum of engines leaving the driveway, seeped through the walls like a reminder the world knew. Their fortress had cracked. For a long time, no one spoke. My footsteps were soft on the rug, but every sound seemed to echo like gavel strikes. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. His voice carried none of the command that had once kept me in line. Elizabeth? He faltered the name, catching in his throat. I don't even know where to begin. He shook his head, staring down at the desk. I am ashamed. Ashamed that I did not see you. Ashamed that when I did see, I refused to acknowledge it. I told myself it was discipline, that pushing you down was building you stronger. But it was neglect. It was cowardice. His words fell heavy, but they did not touch me the way they might have once. The chain had rusted long ago. Now it was breaking. Margaret stepped forward, desperation flickering in her eyes. We only wanted what was best for you, she whispered, almost pleading. Andrew, the estate, the security we thought. We thought you'd thank us one day. I met her gaze, steady, unblinking. No, I said softly, but the quiet carried a blade's edge. You wanted what was easiest for you, to mold me into something that fit your vision, to silence me so you could parade Rebecca without a shadow, to pretend weakness where you never looked for strength. My chest tightened, but not from sorrow, from clarity. What you wanted was control. What you got was silence. And in that silence, I built something you'll never own. Margaret pressed a hand to her lips. Richard lowered his eyes to the desk, his knuckles pale where he gripped the chair. For once, neither had a retort. No lecture, no scorn. Only the hollow sound of people facing truths too long ignored. I turned toward the door, the rug muffling each step until I reached the threshold. For a moment, I let the silence press against me one last time, a reminder of the weight I'd carried in this house. Then I released it. Without looking back, I stepped out of the study. The hallway light was warmer, softer, almost like air after a storm. Andrew leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. When his eyes found mine, there was no pity, only recognition. He spoke quietly, but his words cut deeper than any lecture in that study. You don't owe them forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Freedom tastes sharper when you've swallowed years of ashes. The wind on the Boston rooftop bit clean and bracing, clearing the last smoke of the past from my lungs. December 26th. The city glittered like a circuit board stretched to the harbor, cranes stilled for the holiday ferries, cutting white seams through steel water. Heaters hummed along the parapet, warming a small island of tables where contracts lay clipped beneath paperweights. Cameras clicked in a polite rhythm, not like the frenzy outside the estate. This was controlled, chosen. Mine. Sophia Martinez arrived first, black coat flaring in the wind, a smile that had edges and empathy in equal measure. You look rested, she said, half teasing. I slept, I answered. Finally. Her team fanned out photo assistant checking light, a producer confirming call times, a lawyer running a fingertip down the signature tabs like a pianist testing keys. The Vogue contract was simple. By the time it reached me, the cover feature we'd discussed access within boundaries. I had set a philanthropic companion piece highlighting supply chain reform. Beside it, the foundation documents grants, targeted to circular textile initiatives and worker safety audits, a fund seeded to outlive this moment. Sophia's gaze traveled over the skyline. The world loves a woman who doesn't flinch, she said quietly, almost to herself. I signed. Blue ink against crisp stock, each flourish not a permission slip, but a direction of travel. For years I'd worked alone so no one could seize the wheel. Now I was choosing the hands I'd let inside the car. It felt like risk. It felt like oxygen. Andrew arrived while I initialed the last page, the wind pressing his tie flat against his shirt. He took in the scene without intruding, a study in how to occupy space without demanding it. When our eyes met, the rooftop noise seemed to recede just a step, just enough. Congratulations, he said, and there was nothing performative in it. On which part? He tipped his head toward the folders. All of it. The work. The way you let the truth stand on its own legs. He hesitated, then added, I have a proposal. Two, actually. I waited. Professional, he said first the word, landing with care. My firm's venture arm is building a sustainability portfolio. You're the portfolio we keep chasing. I don't want to own you. I want to partner your terms, your guardrails. Equity where it helps, silence where it doesn't. And the second, he didn't smile. He didn't have to. Personal. Not an answer today. Just permission to not pretend we're strangers who happen to survive the same fire. The wind lifted a corner of the foundation documents. I smoothed it down, feeling a steadiness that hadn't been there a year ago, a week ago, last night. I'll think about both, I said. In that order. He nodded as if that too was a win. Sophia's producer called 5 minutes to golden. We stepped toward the parapet where a backdrop had been clamped against the rail canvas slate sky. A makeup artist dabbed warmth onto my cheekbones and retreated. The photographer raised her camera. Somewhere below us, the city's late afternoon traffic stitched itself into a steady hush. When the mic check ended, Sophia asked if I wanted to say anything on record for the companion piece. I looked out over the skyline church spires, cranes a plane angling toward Logan, and thought about the girl who stitched in the dark while a house slept, who taught herself to measure value without applause. I turned back to the lens. The Carter name doesn't define me, I define it. The words left my mouth and didn't boomerang back. They settled where they belonged, in the air between what I had lived and what I would choose next. A handful of people on the roof clapped, not the loud kind, the honest kind. Andrew's hands stayed in his pockets. The pride in his eyes did the clapping for him. We moved to the contracts for the foundation, inaugural grantees listed in tidy blocks. Startups turning agricultural waste into fiber co-ops, building dye houses that didn't poison rivers, a watchdog unit staffed by auditors who knew the smell of a factory floor. I signed those too and felt something loosen under my ribs. Empire isn't a throne, it's a network of people who stop needing thrones. Sophia checked her phone, scanning a calendar that would soon swallow my January. New York, on the 3rd, she said. Studio at 9. Annie's team wants an early walkthrough, then wardrobe. We'll get you out by 4 if we can. I'll bring my own jacket, I said, thinking of the one that took 2 years and 100 failed prototypes to get right. Light shifted gold threading through the glass of the high-rises. The photographer asked for one last set, hair off the shoulders, chin slightly angled. I wasn't performing for the city. I was acknowledging it the way you acknowledge a teacher who was cruel and still taught you something you use every day. Between frames, my phone buzzed on the table. A reflex had me ignoring it. Then I saw the preview glow up and freeze my breath in the cold. Not an email. A notification. Trends climbing like a fever chart. A single tag rising through the lattice of the world's attention, hard and unambiguous, already swallowing timelines and chyrons. Rebecca is trending online with the hashtag Carter collapse. Some wars end not with a bang, but with silence that cannot be undone. The Manhattan skyline cut sharp against the late December sky, a grid of glass and steel polished to indifference. Inside the law office, the air smelled faintly of ink and leather antiseptic in its stillness. The conference room was a box of glass walls and brushed chrome, the Hudson a moving strip of pewter behind Daniel's hunched shoulders. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his cocktail bravado, his tie slack, his eyes darting at every reflection as if the glass itself might pass judgment. Rebecca was absent, of course. Her name was already sinking beneath the tide of Carter collapse, the phone screens in the lobby blaring her disgrace. Silence was her only refuge now. The lawyers stacked documents in front of me, thick bundles that confirmed what I had known all along. Trademarks registered under my name, patents filed years ago, contracts signed in good faith. Rebecca's theft, her smug use of my sketches, her parading of my ideas, wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was legally void. The firm had mapped every line of the case, cross-referenced every registration. On the table lay the evidence of my endurance. She could spin lies to dinner guests, but not to federal registries. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice rasping from the dryness of the room. Elizabeth. Look, I didn't know it would go this far. He tried to smile, but it wavered like wet paper. I never believed in her plans to edge you out. You have to understand, Rebecca, she was convincing. I went along, but I regret it now. I'll testify against her if that's what you want. I'll put my name on record, anything. His plea hung in the air, limp and self-serving. I studied him the way you study a painting you've already decided you'll never hang in your home, dispassionate, already walking away in your mind. You're not here because I need your help, I said quietly. You're here because you want to salvage your reflection in the mirror. He flushed, opening and closing his mouth like a man gasping for air. The lead attorney slid another document across the table, termination papers crisp as frost. With a slow exhale, I signed them, my name, flowing in blue ink across every line that tied me to the Carter estate. Years of invisible chains reduced to strokes of a pen. The silence that followed was not empty. It was decisive. Daniel shifted again, desperate to fill it. So that's it. You're just cutting them off. Cutting us off. I looked at him, then meeting his eyes so he would see the absence of hesitation. You wanted me erased. Consider this my signature of freedom. The words echoed sharper than I intended, and he recoiled as if struck. Papers gathered, chairs scraped back. The lawyers began to shuffle the meeting to its end. Daniel rose slowly, his shoulders bent, humiliation radiating like heat. He looked once more as if searching for mercy. I offered none. Mercy had been wasted years ago in the nights when no one came to knock on my door and ask why I stitched alone by a yellow bulb. As the door shut behind him, the office returned to its sterile hush. I touched the edge of the signed stack, the paper cool beneath my palm. A war that had lasted years had ended not with fists, not with raised voices, but with signatures and silence that could not be undone. Alone, I whispered into the stillness. Some chains aren't broken, they're melted down into armor. The glass walls carried the words back to me like a vow, sharp, unshakable, forged in the quiet I had learned to wield. They mocked me for my hobby, now the world crowns me with fireproof gold. January 3rd, 2024. The studio smelled faintly of hairspray and fresh flower stems drinking in cylinder vases along a wall of mirrors. Light banks rose like white suns, soft boxes hovering at careful angles, cables braided across the floor in black veins that fed the moment. A rack of my pieces waited in disciplined color ocean glass blues, graphite frost, and one impossible gown the shade of a winter dawn. Assistants moved with quiet choreography clamps, lint rollers, steam wands, a small, reverent storm assembling around a center I finally allowed myself to occupy. Sophia Martinez greeted me with a hug that had the right amount of pressure, real, not performative. "History loves irony, Liz," she said, stepping back to take me in. "And you're about to give it the cover it deserves." I smiled. "Let's make it worth the paper." Wardrobe zipped me into a jacket I'd obsessed over for 2 years, the one whose seams learned to obey only after 100 failures. The fabric behaved like light stiff, where it needed backbone fluid, where movement deserved grace. A stylist tucked a strand of hair, a makeup artist softened the wind marks along my cheekbones. The photographer lifted her camera and the room settled into a hush I recognized from the minutes before a show starts, before a verdict drops, before the first stitch commits cloth to form. "Ready?" she asked. I stepped to the tape mark at center. Ready had been 8 years, arriving quiet and relentless. The lens opened its dark pupil and I let it see not a miracle, not a coronation, just work that had learned to speak in the language the world could no longer pretend not to understand. The shutter rippled. I turned, held, pivoted again. Fabric answered with a muted sigh. Somewhere beyond the light, someone adjusted a reflector. Another voice murmured settings. Between frames, my mind skimmed back to a long oak table under a chandelier, to the neat rows of crystal, and the neat rows of judgment, to a toast that made the room laugh at my expense. I let the memory rise and pass like steam from a kettle, seen, acknowledged, then gone. Andrew stood near the monitor, hands tucked into his pockets, not directing, not intruding, just there, the architecture of steadiness. When our eyes met, he didn't give me a thumbs up or mouth a superlative. He only nodded. "Once I see you." It filled more space than clapping ever could. We shifted into the gown, last the winter dawn one, its panels cut from upcycled fibers that remembered beaches and farms and factories, but came together as if born for music. As they settled it on my shoulders, the fabric cooled my skin and then warmed to it like acceptance. A tech checked the fan. A soft current lifted the hem into a small, convincing weather. "Statement pull," quote the producer called to Sophia. Sophia glanced at me. I thought of the contracts on the rooftop of the foundation, seeded to outlive me, of factories where the lights stayed on without burning the sky. I thought of names, women in 3 time zones who had taught me to listen. I thought of the girl in a locked room with a sewing machine that sounded like a heart refusing to quit. The photographer lifted the camera again. I squared my shoulders and let the words settle, not for them, but for me. They landed like a switch closing a circuit. They called me worthless at Christmas. Today, I called myself unstoppable. The energy in the studio shifted. You could feel it in the hush that followed, and in the small, involuntary exhale a crew member let slip, the kind people make when something clicks into its place. Flash. Another angle. The gown answered with a whisper that sounded like agreement. We broke for a moment. Water. A quick tweak to the collar. The art director came over with a mock-up on a tablet, the masthead in its proud serif negative space framing my jawline. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "makes sense." It did. Not because it was me, but because the work had finally been given the frame it earned. Sophia joined me by the flowers while the team reset the background. "When this hit stands," she said, voice low, "a lot of people will feel like they've known you all along. They'll be lying, of course, but they'll believe it." "I'm fine with that," I said. "Let them arrive late. The door's still open." She laughed, genuine and bright, spoken like someone who knows the difference between the party and the purpose. We returned to the mark for the final sequence. The photographer called for stillness, No fan, no movement, just presence. Hold, she said. Right there, chin a fraction higher. The room compressed into the size of a viewfinder. Every breath, every blink, the metronome of a future setting its own tempo. And in that tunnel of light, I let the last fragments of borrowed doubt drain away. Not erased, recycled. Nothing wasted. The noise around the Carter name became compost for what would grow next. I didn't need their table. I built a different one that expanded by hands instead of bloodline. Perfect, the photographer whispered. One more for safety. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't perform. I simply existed at the center of the life I had made unafraid of the gaze that once dismissed me. The shutter closed like a promise. Final shot. Liz staring at the lens, unblinking caption, fades fashion secret billionaire. Beneath the glittering lights of triumph, the Carter empire finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, while the daughter they had scorned rose higher than they ever imagined. The long fight for dignity revealed a simple truth. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Justice may come late, but, like the final note of a symphony, its resonance lingers and reshapes every silence that came before. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you found meaning in this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Press 1 if you felt the same fire of justice, or 2 if you think the story could go further.